Good morning. My name is Arne Duncan. I'm 57 years old, and try not to get emotional here, but gun violence has haunted my life since I was a teenager. I started to lose friends when I was 14, 15, 16, guys who protected me, guys who helped give me safe passage in our neighborhoods when I was playing basketball on the south and west sides. And at that point, you don't really have a counselor, a social worker, someone to talk to, and those experiences shape you, and unfortunately, fast forward 20 years when I took over the Chicago public schools when I was 36. Lots I'm proud of, lots we can talk about in another conversation, another time. But on my watch during my 7.5 years leading Chicago public schools, on average we had a child killed every 2 weeks due to gun violence. It was a devastating rate of loss, and thank goodness never in a school, but on the bus going home, Blair Holt, going to the corner store, Starkeisha Reed killed by an AK-47 from 100 yards away, 7:30 on a Wednesday morning in her living room, getting ready to go to school. And I don't think I know we as adults, we as educators, we as parents, we as leaders, we as whoever we are, fail to keep our kids safe. I kept above my desk in the Chicago Public Schools a drawing that a young man wrote for me, a drawing that he made for me. And the caption of his drawing was him climbing up a ladder, and his caption was, "If I grow up, I want to be a fireman. If I grow up." And that's the reality for so many of our children, so many of our young men on the south and west side of Chicago. Very rationally, they don't know whether they're going to make it to 18 or to 20 or to 23 or 24. That's reality. Coming home from D.C., I felt we had to try and address this crisis in Chicago. It's a national crisis, and I'll get to that, but address it in my hometown, and started a small nonprofit called Chicago Cred, and we partnered with amazing other nonprofits like the Youth Peace Center that all of our young men here and Leslie work with. The extraordinary joy of my life is getting every single day being able to see our young men grow, to change, to put down the guns, to become extraordinarily positive community leaders. If you just take these 4 young men here, and they're not unique, together they've lost more than 50 of their friends. More than 50 of their friends and family members have been killed. I've never been to Iraq, I've never been to Afghanistan, I've never been to a real war zone, but what our young men and women in Chicago experience every single day is a war zone. And the cumulative impact of that loss and that trauma is extraordinary. And it is never our kids' fault, whether it's in Chicago, whether it's in Texas, whether it's anyplace else. It's never our kids' fault. My worst day here in D.C. was the day of the Sandy Hook shooting. And I got a call from a friend who was working in Connecticut on the way to the scene. It wasn't just what he said, but it was his tone of voice. We didn't quite know what was happening yet. He said, "Arne, this is bad. This is really bad." President Obama dealt with, by definition, the toughest issues on the planet. That's what a president does. That was his worst day. He and I both had young kids at the time. He went down the next day. At that point, Vice President Biden, now President Biden, and I went down a couple days later. And meeting with the families, 20 babies killed, 5 teachers, going to the principal's funeral down Hawksprung. Nothing's ever been harder for me. And that was a decade ago. That was 10 years ago, and nothing changed. I've stayed in touch with some of those families, and one of those mothers came to visit our program 2 weeks ago, Nicole Hockney, 10 years after that, and after the shooting in Texas. And one of our young men was telling his story, and he talked about how he had to become a man at 9 years old. That was his reality. And she said, "Well, I had to go home and tell my 9-year-old that his 5-year-old brother had been killed, and his childhood was taken away from him then." And whether it's young black men on the south and west side of Chicago, whether it's Latino children in Texas, whether it's predominantly white kids in, whether it's in Parkland or at Sandy Hook in Connecticut, what unfortunately we've come to understand is that our shared pain makes us family. And what's starting to bind us together as Americans is this loss to the gun violence. And there's something about that that's fundamentally wrong. And it's got to be our goodness, our positivity, our hope. That's got to be what binds us. But far too often, it's our shared pain. People say to me all the time, Chicago has strict gun laws. That's true. And Chicago has too much gun violence. And that's true. Those two things are both true. So how do you square that circle? And what I say all the time is that Chicago is not an island, and we don't have a moat around us. And the guns pour into our communities from Indiana, this 15 minutes from where I live, that has very lax gun laws. We need a national solution to a national crisis, this epidemic, this public health crisis of gun violence. You can't solve it community by community. And so we desperately need Congress to act, and to act together to make sure that our people can grow up, our young people can grow up free of fear and trauma. As Leslie said, what we worry about every day is our young guys don't just put down the guns, as they risk their lives every single day to work in the community, to bring along the next young generation of kids in our communities that we serve. We desperately worry about their safety because as they're changing, the easy availability of guns is still there. So we ask them to operate in war zones. We ask them to go knock on doors in war zones. We ask them to go find other kids who need help in war zones, and to do that without carrying a gun. And every day we worry about it. We have amazing days. We have heartbreaking days. Our worst day at Chicago Cred was in January, where we had a participant walking out of the door of the Youth Peace Center who was shot with an AK-47 right outside the door. Leslie was at the door. It is a miracle that Leslie's still alive. And the trauma that she and all the other participants there here, all the other staff experienced is real. In AR-15, this young man was hunted. He was hunted and he was exterminated. If people want to hunt geese, if they want to hunt ducks, if they want to hunt deer, I have no problem with that. I'm all for that. I just don't like when we hunt people. And far too often in our country, we're hunting people. And we're doing it with weapons of war that belong on battlefields, but don't belong in our streets, and don't belong at the door of the Youth Peace Center. The United States is uniquely violent. There's not another industrialized country that comes close to the United States in terms of violence. Other nations have angry young men. Other nations have folks who are mentally ill. Other nations have people who play violent video games. What other nations don't have is easy access to weapons of war. And it pains me to say this, but I believe this for a long time. What's different about America is in America we value our guns more than we value our children. And that's ultimately what has to change. At some point, we have to value the lives and potential and the possibility and the leadership of young men in Chicago and in every city and every suburb and every rural part of our country. And at some point, we'll stop talking, we'll stop thinking, we'll stop praying, and we will actually act. And when we decide that we value our children more than we value our guns, we will have an entire generation of people growing up without the fear and trauma that unfortunately our young men and women in far too many places around the country have to deal with. If we don't act now, I don't know when we will. I desperately hope Congress understands what's at stake, what's possible, how fixable this is. This is not finding a cure for cancer. This is not putting a man on Mars. Every other country has figured out a way to do this. We just need a tiny slice of courage to get this done. It's been 3 decades with nothing happening positive. The fact that we have 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats talking, coming up with a framework for an agreement. I've been very unhopeful about this, very pessimistic about this, but I'm more hopeful than I have been in a long, long time. And I hope our leaders in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, and I know President Biden's heart. I've seen him in these situations. I know he'll sign this as soon as he gets to his desk. I desperately hope for young people around the country we can finally do the right thing. Thank you.